Into the unknown, into the unknown, into the unknown.
Welcome to Coffee Lit Rev. My name's Chris Hendon. I'm joined by Doran Pennington. Today we're going to be discussing a paper published in the journal Sustainability. The title is The Effects of Instagram Marketing Activities on Customer-Based Brand Equity in the Coffee Industry. It's an interesting article. It basically makes the case that if you do positive things on social media, it has a positive impact on the way that people perceive your brand. Fine. But Doran and I know nothing about this. And instead, what we needed to do was call in a true expert. Absolutely our pleasure to introduce Morgan Eckroth. I'm sure many of you have interacted with Morgan over the years, consuming their social media content in the form of Morgan Drinks Coffee, more recently as the content manager or content creator at Onyx Coffee Lab. Of course, you probably know Morgan from their TikTok channel, Instagram, as well as YouTube. Morgan's a wonderful person who started their career in coffee at Keeper Coffee out of Portland, Oregon, and really put Keeper Coffee on the map as sort of the local, not quite mom and pop shop version of specialty coffee, but a really good, warm place to be. And then moved on from there to now working at probably one of the premier coffee roasters in the United States. Runner-up in the World Barista Championship. Thanks for joining us, Morgan.
Hey, good morning.
How's it going?
It is so good. How are you two doing?
We are good. How's YouTube going for you?
It's good. It's a weird job, definitely. It's a weird platform. It is kind of constantly changing, and so figuring out how to adapt with it and kind of play into like all the changes that are happening while also kind of being like, I want to make things that I want to make is always an interesting balance, but that's kind of like name of the game, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's something I feel like I notice, especially with coffee YouTube people, is like they're always kind of shifting around trying to find different things to do. And you know, it seems hard to just continuously come up with ideas that are going to be a little different. So
it's definitely interesting. There's the very, very like kind of wide world of gear review, which is definitely kind of a lane you can fall into. And then there's kind of like what James has going on, which is more of the like, I think nowadays kind of the like absurd of coffee. And then there's the everything in between. And it's like picking which one you want to stick in, or if you kind of want to touch on everything is, I think every coffee YouTuber is like, do we do everything? Do we do one thing? Like, what's the best strategy here?
Before we get started, I do want to know, where are you right now?
I'm actually in my studio right now. It's in like kind of the northwest quadrant of Portland. And it's still definitely a work in progress, but I moved over here a couple months ago for both an office space that was not my home, and then also like I've set up back there as YouTube. I've got like a cupping and like work table space back here, storage, just kind of like an everything space right now.
Well, it looks really pretty. I'm sure that some people have already seen it through the lens of YouTube already. So that's pretty nice. Just briefly, I will say one thing about your tile in the background. So when Lance Hedrick was tiling out his place in Portugal, he posted yeah. You remember this? Did you see my comment on it?
I think I know where you're going with this, but do tell.
Because he like tiled them on this very strange aperiodic angle. It was like something like, I don't know, it looked to my eye like about 27.5 degrees or something. And so every so often there'd be like this tiny little fraction of a tile that would just have to be tiled at the very top line.
I will say, don't look too closely at it.
Okay.
There are definitely one or two spots where I myself, when I film videos on it, I kind of like shift to stand a little bit in front of them so you can't see there's a couple spots.
Let me just hit TikTok for a second. People are constantly worried about whether Congress is going to prevent creators from using TikTok. And of course, this is, for some people, an existential crisis because a lot of people have made a good career out of using that as the platform for social media. Are you worried about this? Is this something that's like continues to cause you active stress?
You know what? I will say, I mean, to some extent, yes. I mean, there is a level of nervousness over such a kind of prolific and like large platform going away. But on the other side, I've been active as a creator on TikTok since 2019. And so it feels like I have lived through like 3 of these like TikTok bans. And so for some of us kind of like old guard on TikTok, it's like, all right, like everyone get your goodbyes out. Like we've done this a million times, whereas a lot of the new creators are kind of scrambling. And for us, we're just kind of like, either take it away or don't, but stop playing with the emotions.
Yeah, I think there's that. And then there's also the fact that your YouTube and Instagram outlets are also very productive.
There's some security in that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go for 2 of your high viewed TikTok videos. To quote a millennial thing, they live rent free.
Oh, I'm so nervous right now.
For those that can't see us, Doran is dead. Okay, so the first one is that you have this video that is like a caricature of all social media people, where this thing's been viewed like 22.5 million times, of a customer coming in periodically and always taking photos of the latte art, and then you asking them,
oh,
hey,
I know this one.
yeah, and you're like, hey, how'd it turn out? And they show you the photo and they're like, yeah, pretty good. And and I had nothing. so this is too real, because I think this is like, most of specialty coffee exists in the cyberspace of just photos of it, and not a sensory experience associated with it.
Very much so.
Isn't that a weird thing?
It's an interesting challenge, I will say. Definitely working on the creator and also like the more official marketing side of the coffee industry, of like, there is such an like innately human aspect to specialty coffee, and especially like within cafes as well. And so, it's always like, the question is always just like, how do we translate that to like the online space? And it's an interesting challenge that a lot of people approach different ways. And I think for me, a lot of what my content has turned into is really approaching the kind of like human side of it, which is sometimes leads to those sort of videos where it's like, this is a silly thing that we all do, but it's kind of sweet in its own way.
That's really something that I've been thinking about getting ready to talk to you, because I remember when I moved to Oregon a year ago, the first time that I went to Portland, I made it a point to go to Keeper, because I've seen your videos of it. And the thing that I reflect on now is that none of the things about Keeper were about, oh, we have the most juicy natural, it's insane, it tastes crazy. None of it's about that. None of it's like, oh, we have the best espresso machine, the best grinder, the highest tech stuff, It's all kind of about how being there is a nice experience. And I recently went to Austin for like a physics thing, and I lived there for 7 years. And my favorite coffee shop there is not the one that has the most insane tasting coffee. It's the one that I like to spend time at. And in thinking of how you create an image for a brand, in this case Keeper, it's kind of interesting to think of how you want to highlight different aspects that you think will stick out to people. And
yeah,
I wonder how you came to that approach to, putting out stuff for Keeper, where it was just very like wholesome and chill, and like coming here is a nice time,
A lot of my content, that sort of kind of like baristas, I just call them sketches. I feel like that's the best word.
Yeah.
A lot of that started back when I was working in Corvallis at Tried and True Coffee. And a lot of people like don't know this nowadays, because I've kind of shifted so much in the past few years. But like very early on, a lot of my content was not necessarily like mean spirited, but it was a lot more pokey from kind of a barista perspective, of like, it was a lot of customer complaints. It was like those more like humorous scenarios, and a lot less, I think, human. And the switch really happened when I moved to Keeper, and also kind of in the wake of winning the 2022 barista championship, because there was this kind of, I had this like a little bit of a mental shift of like, is this actually what I want to be showcasing in coffee? Because it kind of gave off this perspective of like, someone who's a bit more flippant about it, which I wasn't, but it was, I was aware that that was the perceived impact of it. And so I settled into these kind of more human barista sketches, just because I felt like that side of coffee, and especially customer service, wasn't being showcased nearly as much. It's, I think, very easy to kind of like dog on to like kind of the pain of customer service and hospitality, which is a very real side of it. But simultaneously, like, there's a reason so many of us still love it and are in it. And it is this like person-to-person connection aspect, and coffee facilitates that so well that I kind of just put my brain to like, how do I show this like really nice part of this job that so many of us have.
So you're just basically saying that you got nicer.
I got a little bit more introspective, a little bit nicer.
Yeah, no, I mean you've always the original videos in 2019, certainly that was sort of like an element of what third wave had that was, really a thing. But now we
Yeah.
moved, like, after COVID, a lot has changed because people really want you to come to the space. So
It's true.
Yeah, I still remember, like 3 or 4 years ago, you go and order a macchiato at a shop, and they're like, "Oh, we don't.
The
It's not going to
eyebrow
be what
raisins.
it's not going to be what you think." And now people are like, "So we do a traditional style. Is that what you want, or do you want something?" It's a lot more accommodating.
Yeah.
People definitely got nicer.
It's very true. I think a lot of the kind of shift too was this kind of pushback against that, like the pretentious, like specialty barista.
let me share with you my other TikTok video that lives in my brain.
To see me shrinking a little bit away from the camera.
Okay. Well, on the topic of you shrinking, so you have a video, bear or cat, and it's you play barista customer and child of customer, and basically you're asking the child whether they'd like a bear or a cat's etched into their latte, or whether their hot chocolate.
Their hot chocolate, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So why I like this is not because the video is great, of course, but it's not because of the video. It's because I want to share with you a story. When I was 18 years old, I had this girlfriend back in Australia, and she invited me to meet her parents at a restaurant one night. And I walk in, and I'm feeling, as I feel, just like happy to have dinner, I suppose, and sit down. And the dad looks over at me and he goes, "Rhino or giraffe?"
What a question. Totally out of the blue, unprompted.
So let me ask you, Doran, rhino or giraffe?
I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with this rhino or this giraffe.
Well, the kid didn't know. The kid didn't know either. The kid, Morgan's face of this child in this video is bear.
I'm gonna go rhino.
Oh, that would be unanswered. That is
Bold
one of
choice.
Yeah.
I'm a bold individual.
That is not the answer that I would have given, and that's not the answer I did give. Morgan, would you go rhino or giraffe?
I feel like the giraffe is the least threatening of the two options, and knowing little of what is to come, I think I would go giraffe.
Yeah, that's how I weighed it up. I did some quick calculus in my brain. I was like,
Which one am I more likely to survive?
there was no further discussion. This was just the question, and then we moved on. So I don't have any further comment.
To this day, you have no idea what he was trying to gauge.
That is truly water under the bridge. So now, nonetheless, let's move on. Let's move on. We've got this paper. So are you trained formally in marketing? Do you have a background in this?
I have if a bachelor's degree counts, I did go to school for it, and interestingly enough, kind of went into my own like career of content creation, like directly out of school, kind of a symptom of the pandemic. But I did go to school for it, and then have kind of like dabbled in it for the last couple of years before I came on to Onyx, like to really officially work in it in a larger sense.
So then you are absolutely more of an expert in this than Doran and I. Let's go briefly to Onyx before we go straight into the paper.
Sure.
In the coffee industry, Onyx is viewed as probably one of the best at marketing. When they got you to go work for them, that's kind of like when a sports team goes and gets an extremely good quarterback.
Dodgers getting Shohei Ohtani.
Dodgers getting Shohei.
Very flattering.
I want you to tell me about Onyx and you, and I'm going to leave this open. Just go for it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, totally. So I joined the Onyx team pretty much directly after the 2022 USBC. Initially, when I kind of partnered with Onyx as a sponsor for competition, that was really all it was going to be. I was the competitor. They were the trainers, the coffee providers, and then after winning, there was this kind of realization that we were going to continue working together towards Worlds, which was the next level coming up in a few months. But kind of simultaneously to that, I felt like I had gotten to know the team pretty dang well. I had really, really loved the time I had spent with the people there. Onyx for me had always been kind of like a dream job to work at back when I'd been in college and wanting to go into coffee. And so I think there was kind of this realization on the other side of the table as well, with that they were growing really quickly, especially in the e-com space coming out of the pandemic. The marketing team was still fairly tight at that point. They were looking to expand, and so they came to me being like, "Hey, would you be interested in working with us? We know you have, MDC is a whole thing going on, but we would have space for you on the team if you wanted." And I was also kind of about to walk over to them to be like, "Please, can we keep doing this for a little bit longer?" And so it was kind of a perfect combination. I will say I am one of the few kind of like part-time employees. So I work remotely most of the time and then travel out there fairly frequently. But my role was kind of carved out as like content marketing specialist, and it is it's a flexible role that kind of covers and touches on a lot of our marketing points, but a majority of it focuses on our organic short form video. So that kind of format that I function in quite a lot with MDC, how we could integrate that into Onyx. So with that, I've really focused on building out a lot of our more like home focused copy content, a lot more of like the kind of entertainment side. We really had the education side was like pretty much on lock, but how could we make more? How could we just get some different buckets of stuff happening beyond that? And so that's still what my role focuses on a lot today. I play a little bit in like the paid marketing, like content creation side, and then sometimes special projects would pop up. But for the most part, I'm there behind the scenes, either helping with strategy and ideation behind like organic content or creating it myself.
So let me give the brief overview here of this paper. So basically, the concept is a series of people, over 300 people, are polled and asked about their types of engagement that they have with coffee companies via Instagram posts. And they're asking, first they figured out which companies are the ones that people engage with, and this is
interestingly Starbucks.
Yeah, well, yeah, Starbucks so on Starbucks,
top of the list.
Yeah, Twosome Place.
These are all South Korean, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? Because they're basically saying, do you engage with this coffee company via Instagram posts? And then they spend a long time talking about various different categories of interaction. Now, recalling that this idea is that they're trying to build brand equity. Morgan, I want you to help me understand what is brand equity?
Brand equity is kind of I always kind of think of it as the overarching kind of power that a brand has. It's very, very encompassing. Brand equity often breaks down into the quality and cohesion of the literal branding elements that the brand has chosen. It breaks down into the brand voice and mission statement. But larger than that, and what this article or what the study really broke down was the more kind of intangible side of brand equity, which comes from the consumer and how the brand is perceived, and how kind of the balance between the brand's like actual literal product lines up with the perceived value that the consumer has.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of bundles up into equity.
So yeah, because they made a comment that also jumped out at me that sort of adds to that, which is it's also not only their assets, which are all the positive things you mentioned, but also their liabilities.
Yeah.
The liabilities component of branding is something I rarely think about. I mean, I think about it in the sense of science. Like I try and do good science and only publish good science, knowing that if we publish an incremental paper and it's not that good, that does damage the brand in the sense that we're no longer viewed as the leader in a certain area.
For sure.
So I guess, is that the right analogy in science?
Definitely.
Okay. So they mention, I guess 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 different things here associated with a way to build brand equity, brand awareness. There's brand image. There is perceived quality, and there is brand loyalty. Those 4 things sort of are all the things you just mentioned, right? Where do you place? Is it equal parts? Does a company?
Oh gosh, that's so tricky. It really like boils down to a lot of strategy. I think probably the I'm like trying to be careful with how I say this because it can sometimes differ between like brand versus like creator brand, which is like a whole different beast, and I have to
Yeah, they're two
mentally
different
separate
things,
them a
right?
little. Yeah, they're two different things. I think brand loyalty is the hardest to curate, and that's the really, really important one. I would tentatively say I think that has the heaviest value. I think it almost kind of goes backwards in the way they presented it in this study. I think perceived quality is a really, really, really important one that I think sometimes people don't think about as much as they should, because there's kind of this internally like of course it's a good product, like why wouldn't it be? Why would anyone think it's not? And that's an easy kind of like an easy slippery slope to slide down.
Yeah, but let's hit that one in specialty coffee for a second. Perceived quality could, if I look at an Instagram post and it is well curated, unlike the Coffee Lit Rev Instagram posts, which are made by me quickly. Perceived quality in coffee. Okay, we're not talking about the coffee itself. We're talking about
perceived value
from the Instagram post.
And
this is, you have to decouple that from tasting the product that you inevitably purchase, because that value is a different perception. That is literally a taste perception, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify. We're talking about the perception without having bought the product.
Yes.
Super weird. Okay.
Well, there are coffee Instagrams that I follow that some of them they're not like necessarily about the quality of the coffee. They're kind of goofy, but they're done so well. Like I think immediately of Friedhot's Instagram, where it's like,
oh sure,
they're just like goofing off in a warehouse or something, but it's so well done, and like the graphics are really crispy, and like you can tell that a lot of effort and thought went into it. But it's still just like at the end of the day, they're goofing off in a warehouse, you know. But I view that as high quality. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a double-edged sword, I think, to have, especially like social media content that is very polished, that is like very good quality. There is it makes your job that much harder once you're selling the product. If you're a brand that has 100% excellent product and your content is 100% excellent, like fantastic. But that is so rarely the case of brands diving so deeply into the marketing almost too early on, to the point that there's an imbalance. And then once that product is received and is lesser than that perceived value, like it's almost like a harder thing to overcome than if it was like a mid-tier kind of level of content.
And then there's brand image. And I think brand image folds in neatly with this idea of perceived quality, because I don't think you should separate them. And the paper even makes the case that those should not be separated, because if the brand is perceived as high quality, then the image is, it's viewed as a high quality company. I'm going to sort of derail you with a couple of airline stories. So
excellent.
So of the legends of social media curation, definitely in the upper echelons of them are Ryanair. Now, I don't know. Ryanair is, I don't know if you've seen what they do. If you complain to them on Twitter, they will shame you.
They just roast you.
The perceived quality of Ryanair's outward facing thing is, in my opinion, very high, because while the product they're selling, which is the cheapest airline ticket you can buy in mainland Europe, is obviously low, because they've matched the quality, their output, it far exceeds the
consistency.
Oh yeah. I mean, like we're talking masterful. And then occasionally you see fast food restaurants in America go at one another, like, Wendy's is going after Burger King and whatnot. And you see this and you're like, oh, these are good. I mean, these are good. Like they're actually good. Let's get to brand love. This is the final category. And there is an airline relationship. I was sitting in a United lounge on the way back from North Carolina 2 days ago. And I watched this guy walk up to try and order a free beer from the United counter. And he's like, do you have Budweiser? And they're like, I'm sorry, sir. We have like infinite other beers, but we don't carry that one. And this guy was like, but I love Budweiser.
He's so tired. He's been on like a red eye all night. It is the only thing he wanted. It would have made his day so much better.
He's like, I know. And I was reading this. I was like, what is brand love? And then I just remembered, it's like,
just a single tier.
It's that guy. Okay. What is brand love, Morgan?
Brand love is the most intangible of all of these things. I found it really funny to read brand love being like explained in like somewhat scientific terms, because it's so amorphous of a thing. It's like we can quantify like some of the perceived value and like brand equity and like all of these things. But brand love is it's like your gut reaction to them. It's like how much you're willing to kind of humanize what is essentially a corporation, and turn it into something you care about and you're willing to go to bat for.
Yeah, I like that they say you can only experience fierce love-like feelings towards a restricted number of brands. It's like, you
get 5 brands.
I like all of y'all, but these couple are professionals, and I feel fierce feelings towards them. They also say it's a deeper and more enduring emotion than just liking a brand and is considered irreplaceable. So accept no substitutions.
Oh, I love it.
When I read through the paper, then they go in these hypotheses, and they actually state a lot of hypotheses in here.
Yeah.
But usually in other scientific areas, we don't do this. And this is actually kind of an interesting exercise of writing down what you're going to test with statistics, and something chemists could learn from. But interestingly here, if you read these hypotheses, they are all basically saying if a brand does any of those things we just mentioned, achieves brand love, achieves brand awareness, blah, blah, blah. If a company does any of those, they are perceived as good. This is, again, related to the social media content here, and it's not related specifically to your experience. But I do want to just blur the lines slightly by saying I was trying to think of a brand I love. I love United Airlines. In terms of actual like social media outputs, terrible. Okay. In terms of like what you're doing, you're sitting in a metal pipe 35,000 feet above the ground. Terrible.
Not a great product in that sense.
You call them, customer service, terrible. Like every aspect of it's terrible. I love this company.
You experience fierce feelings of love for this company.
My wife's like, hey, why don't we just fly on Delta? No, that's not.
It would be betraying a loved one.
But I love United.
Yeah.
Just a sadness washes over you.
First thing I'll say is if you ask a question to a bunch of people who are responding to a survey about whether they engage with coffee social media, and they tell you that they do it regularly, like once every twice a week or whatever the number was in this paper, there's a good chance that they're doing it because unlike me with United, there's a good chance that they actually like it. They may even love it, but they just like it at minimum. Okay. When you look at the table 2 of the reliabilities and confirmatory factor analysis, did any of the contributions to table 2, which are Instagram marketing activities, brand awareness, image, perceived quality, or revisiting that social media platform, did any of that surprise you? Is it worth talking about any of those in particular? I'll leave it to you to guide us.
A lot of what I found very interesting about this study specifically was almost like a little bit of the age of it. Like this was a study that came out and also a little bit of the parameters of this. This was a study that came out, I think, in late 2021 and then was published in early 2022.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And then additionally, one of the things in going through all of the 5 coffee accounts that they were specifically mentioning in this, those being seemingly primarily cafes rather than being like roasters, was I think a really, really interesting component of this. But as far as this table 2, I think most of that seemed pretty straightforward.
These are all positive things affirming that anybody who does high quality advertising, they paid a marketing firm to work on their stuff, presumably. It has a positive. It's positive. Yeah. So reading this must feel good because this is like what you're a master of. So
we're supposed to be doing this.
One of the things that you mentioned before was that roasters were not included in this. And you could make a case that these brands have specialty arms to them, but largely I would say that these are a mixture of specialty and commodity, servicing a large portion, lots of cafes, basically.
Yeah.
When I read this, I was thinking, I was like, Morgan, I wish that you and I and whoever else we could get to help us with this did this exact study, but for like specialty coffee roasters, like the
Yeah.
brands that we think are the pillars. And you would definitely not get such uniformly positive responses.
No.
Because I think the specialty coffee industry is far more brutal when it comes to this, because it's hard to do a good job, or a truly good job.
And it's also, I think, one of the really interesting distinctions that lies between roasters and cafes is that with cafes, they are providing like a whole an entire experience. Like there is not much work that the customer needs to do, whereas with coffee and specialty roasters, which is a lot more of the side that I have to operate in, you are essentially selling an ingredient that the customer then has so much more work to do, and also you're leaving them with so many more variables where their experience with your product can misalign so strongly with what you say it's going to do, which provides like a super weird marketing challenge.
Yeah, but so then it's so weird, right? Because like what then happens is that the consumer projects their lived experience with that product back onto what they are perceiving in the next Instagram post.
Yes, correct.
And that
like you can't, like, there's no avoiding that.
Yeah, but that's so from a scientific like angle of designing an experiment around this, that is so hard. Let's go for an easy example of this. If all of a sudden tomorrow a micro roaster that you've never heard of manages to buy all of the best of Panama and then is the one that drops that, they all of a sudden vastly swing the interest. Like they elevate who they are just by the purchasing decision. You then taste it. If they did a good job, then all of a sudden people know who they are. But it's not because of their advertising necessarily. Like I'm not really sure if it's a chicken and egg situation, or if there's a way to like, is the goal to try and figure out how to inject yourself into the circle of having high quality product that you actually sell meshed with high quality social media outputs? How do you get into that cycle?
I wish I could give like an answer. I wish I had like, like this is how we do it. I think roasters in the coffee space are presented with a really, really difficult challenge that I would love to see kind of reflected in a study in a similar way. I find, I think if we just look at kind of like cafe accounts and coffee shop brands, which this focuses a lot more on, I think so much of a majority of what is like the US specialty market things about coffee brand marketing, they are thinking about it in such a different way than what this study presents. But in that same way, I found it really interesting to think about brand love when it comes to coffee shop social accounts. I think those sorts of accounts have a much higher chance of building that sort of brand love because they are inherently tied in with this very tangible, like physical experience of having a space to relate it to. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about these sort of like videos that are created of, if someone has this sort of positive experience in a cafe space and then goes and interacts with them online, I think if they can tie those two feelings together, I think brand love blossoms very quickly out of that. Whereas literally any other form of like, food service or coffee marketing has a much harder time developing that brand love.
Two responses that I highlighted under that brand love that I really enjoyed were that this coffee brand make me happy, and separately
I did like that one too.
And I like the next one even more. This coffee brand make me feel so good. Now, the only Instagram account that makes me feel good is 50% Arabica.
So a question I had for you is, you've been in this world for a long time, and thinking specifically of Instagram, for me as a user of it, it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, everything feels like it has to be a reel now, and stories are such a thing. How has the change or the evolution of Instagram over the last few years affected how the marketing of coffee operates?
Sure. It's interesting. I think I want to scroll back up to the study to make sure I don't like totally misquote this. They broke down kind of the function of content into a couple different ways. They said, I think it was interaction, entertainment, customization, and trendiness as like the components of marketing. And I think in previous years, back before Instagram and pretty much most social media functioned in such a algorithmically like tailored way, it was far easier to build brand loyalty. It was far easier to share and promote like interaction. Whereas nowadays, all of these platforms are so much more geared towards trendiness and entertainment. And so what that kind of means on the marketing side is that brand awareness is a bit easier. Like it's far easier to kind of blast out to millions of people to go like viral, quote unquote. But the retention of users and the ability to like actually create impactful relationships online, I think has like pretty drastically decreased. And so I think that's a lot of the trends that we're seeing in especially like coffee marketing nowadays, where, you know, I'm like, I'm not going to like call out any roasters, but there are like larger companies out there who have pivoted to a totally different strategy of content, where their like brand content nowadays is what I would call a little bit of like gotcha content. It's very memey. It's very like from the perspective of like a customer complaint or something. Like it's just a totally different, it's a totally different like emotional impact than what they used to do. And it's also not really talking about coffee anymore. And so there's this trade-off of like they are growing immense brand awareness from these viral, like kind of lower tier content pieces. But simultaneously, I would say that they've seen a pretty drastic decrease in brand loyalty, but also like my perceived value in them has dropped significantly. And so it's this kind of interesting shift that has happened in quite literally like the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's like now you don't just have to think about what the audience wants to see, you have to think about what the algorithm wants to show. And you know, people have this perception of AI as just like these silly pictures that get generated from text prompts or chat GPT or whatever, but that's like I think the most immediate example of AI in everyone's lives is what is getting shown to you. And having to think about not only what people that are interested in your cafe or your roaster want to see, but how to package it in a way that the algorithm decides it is worthy to share is something that I'm so happy I don't have to think about.
It's you kind of have to pick. There's really like two very clear options of like, do you want to speak to the people who are currently following you, and your customers who are engaged, or do you want to blast out to the masses and hopefully pull in like a few new people? And it is very hard to do both simultaneously, because inevitably if you're speaking to the masses, you're having to speak at a much higher level that your audience already inevitably knows. And so it's really hard to do one or the other. I think a lot of people are trying to do both simultaneously, and that's where a lot of, I think, confusion and just like noise online happens.
I remember like 2 years ago, I was at maybe last year I was at Mice in Melbourne, and I ended up cornered by Lance actually, and Lance and I
What
were
a sentence.
Lance and I were having a discussion, and he told me that I'm an old person. I need to move my camera back away from the object that I'm taking a photo of.
I'm just like imagining this scenario right
No,
here.
it's okay. I'm getting peer review. I'm getting some feedback. So I'm like, okay, so I got to start taking these like super wide angles. So every time I'm going to take a photo, I just like move the camera back like 5 centimeters. So that's fine. So as I program myself to make better content, but what I'm really getting to here is that there are skills that are not native to me that may be native to you or others for that matter. There are also learned skills, and perhaps I could learn the rules of how to do this well. But the important point is this is a skill. Like MDC, your brand is not, that didn't just happen without thought. This was you are really, really good at doing everything that's contained within this paper. Anyway, basically, if you do good things, output good things, people are going to have a positive response, right?
Indeed.
And that can be as simple as moving the camera back 5 centimeters. That changes the quality of whatever the heck it is I was taking. You know what it was? It was that little shiny, the golden snitch. Sasha's.
The Paragon. Yes.
Yeah, the Paragon. So I wanted to get the photo of the ball, but apparently I was too close to the ball. It's like, but you can't see it if you're all the way back here. So
well, that's where it like it's, you know, I think one of the other interesting kind of like aspects of this is like there's a lot of kind of mention of like good, like there's like implied level of good content, and it's like I think one of the things I would have been interested in seeing in this, besides just them breaking it down into interaction, entertainment, customization, trendiness, is like a more like quantifiable definition for what good content is, because while that does vary like brand to brand, person to person, I think there are some really strong like pillars involved with defining good content, and it leaves this a little bit amorphous as to like branded a good thing,
Yeah.
customer feels good about it, and it's like, well, what is the good thing? Like, how did they do
So
that?
this is exactly something I wanted to ask you. So I want to do a service to the listeners of Coffee Lit Rev and get some free consulting from Morgan Eckroth. So
Excellent.
something I've been thinking about is that, I follow a lot of cafes, roasters, etc. on Instagram, and they all have a very different approach. I mean, some of them, like, all of their posts are super sleek and like fit a color scheme, and it's like, here's our new drink. And some of them are just like, you can tell it's just the baristas being like, hey, we haven't made an Instagram post in a while. We'll just take a picture of the patio.
My boss said I needed to do
Yeah.
this.
So the point I'm trying to make is that coffee Instagram as a space is really varied, and like the voices that these people have are really different. The things that they're going for is really different. So if you were to give any blanket advice for how people in the coffee world could make better use of Instagram in terms of marketing, what would you want to supply as advice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is, I think, very applicable to coffee, but I think also very generally. Um, One of the things that I think is super important when creating content is to, from the start, have a really clear vision for what your goal of the content is, in kind of twofold of like what you want the customer to do after they have consumed said said content, but additionally what emotion you want them to walk away with. And I think defining those two things immediately before you get into shooting creation like X, Y, and Z is really, really valuable. I think sometimes a disconnect can happen if, I mean, and it's like a very, it seems straightforward when I'm saying it, but like a coffee brand is launching, they're launching a new release, and they are hoping people will go and purchase it afterwards, and they want people to feel as excited about it as they do. But they shoot it like super, super dryly. The person talking about it is a little bit more monotone. Perhaps they don't have like a script put together. Perhaps the box isn't lit well when they're showing, whatever the coffee is that they're selling. It's just these little things that happen in content production that have a really, really sweeping effect to people consuming it, and also on the emotional takeaway they have from it. That's kind of one of the biggest, I think, kind of pitfalls I think see people fall into, is just not aligning their action goal with what they're emotionally portraying in content, and setting yourself up for success by having both of those set in stone before you go into the creation, I think is a super valuable thing.
In other words, no diffuse energy. You need to plan what you're going to do here.
This is kind of these are kind of two different approaches in science. Some people are, I'm just going to do some experiments and see what happens, and find out what I find out. And some people are very like, I need to answer this question, and these three experiments are going to get me there the fastest. And I mean, both ways do end up working, and I think every project is some combination of the two approaches. But I try to emphasize as much as I can to people that I mentor to like think about the question that you're trying to answer before you go and start doing experiments. And so
yeah, and going off of what you just said, and also if I can like piggyback on what I just said too, I think the other like most important thing, especially within like a brand, I think if you are an individual, I think you have so much more flexibility. Probably disregard this a little bit, but I think consistency in your identity online is incredibly important for a brand, and so that means you have a lot less flexibility to kind of like throw things at the wall and see what sticks, because then you have that potential effect of like lowering your perceived value due to any perceived missteps you have. And so when you're taking on what you were saying with like, perhaps we just go and see what happens versus having a really pre-planned like format, like either one of those works, but it's like pick which one you're going to stick with.
Morgan, I want to give you an opportunity to say anything more that we did or did not say from the paper that you want to comment on, or give us a concluding remark.
this was a really fun piece to look at. I have not thought about marketing this like analytically in a while, and so because this is an accessible paper, like I would recommend people read through it. I think it's super valuable. It did like confirm a lot of the things I've kind of seen and believed for a while, which was very affirming and very nice to read. But I think if you are someone who is building a brand in the coffee industry or not, I think reading through this could provide a lot of value. So I'm just glad I had a chance to do it myself.
Thanks very much for making time for us today. Appreciate it.
Come to the coffee lab. We're not that far away.
Oh my gosh, I know. I've been meaning. It is like it's a crime that I haven't been down there already.
I'll email you. Ben Put is coming in October to do some electrochem work, so you should come down and say.
Oh, I'll be there.
All right.
100%.
Good.